Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For tonight's true story adventure, we've come to Terminal Island, California. Directly behind me, we find Peter and Jill Hamilton of Glasgow, Scotland, and their 24-foot sloop, the Salmo. With the Salmo, but without any modern equipment of any kind, such as electricity, radio, auxiliary power, the Hamiltons sailed from Montreal to Pitcairn Island, Tahiti, then back across the Pacific to California. Tonight, the actual films of their honeymoon voyage.
Bold Journey, your television passport to the exciting, colorful world of adventure. Brought to you each week by the Ralston Purina Company of Checkerboard Square, St. Louis. Makers of Rice Chex, Wheat Chex, Rye Crisp, and Instant Ralston, the famous foods in the checkerboard packages. And here, speaking for Ralston, is that celebrated cereal salesman, Lee Goodman.
Did I tell you? We're going to have a big family reunion. Yes, sir. And can you imagine? The whole family's made up of cereal salesmen. For instance, my grandfather, Leander Goodman.
Yes, sir. Wheat Chex, the cereal made on purpose for grown-ups and kids who want to be like grown-ups. I thank you.
And here's my songwriting uncle, Oscar Goodman II. You get that grown-up feeling when you start out the day with Wheat Chex, Wheat Chex, Wheat Chex. Bite-sized little biscuits of toasted wheat make you want to eat and eat and eat and eat. Now, of course, we're having all the other relatives, too. And here's a surprise for the whole family. We're all having Wheat Chex out of this one big package. It's the new family-size package, and it packs over a pound of Wheat Chex, enough for 18 servings. Plenty big, and so is the flavor. Because Wheat Chex are these bite-sized little biscuits of toasted wheat. They're husky, they're hearty, and they stay crisp and crunchy the whole bowl through. Look for the convenient new family-size Wheat Chex, or regular-size Wheat Chex, the grown-up cereal from Checkerboard Square.
Romance on the high seas is sometimes more than a mere expression. One fine August day, Mr. Peter Hamilton left his sweetheart Jill in England and sailed from Glasgow to Montreal, Canada, fully intending to circumnavigate the globe alone. However, he soon came to realize that a single sailor's existence can be a very lonely life indeed. And so he returned to England, married Jill. Then, the adventuresome couple decided to embark upon a honeymoon voyage, fully intending to complete the bridegroom's original plan of circumnavigating the globe. Well, they got as far as Tahiti, once again had to cut the voyage short, and again for a very good reason. For their first appearance on our program series, it's my sincere pleasure to welcome Mr. and Mrs. Peter Hamilton of Glasgow, Scotland. Hi, Mrs. Hamilton. How are you, sir?
How do you do?
May I sit?
Please do.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Hamilton, no man is going to contemplate a circumnavigation of the globe unless he's had a wide experience in sailing. So suppose we just forget about modesty for the moment. Would you tell us about your sailing experience?
Yes, of course. I went to sea first in the British Navy when I was only 17, just before the outbreak of World War II, and served on through that, and also in the Korean War later on, and ended up finally having command of a frigate for a while. And so when I left, I thought that I'd like to see how you did it in a smaller boat and go to some of the out-of-the-way places for a change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. Well, Mrs. Hamilton, we've been neglecting you just a little bit here. Just when and how did you and your husband meet?
Well, Peter was working on Salmo in the south of England, and I was going to stay with mutual friends, and he met me at the station.
You know, he went off alone and left you there, unmarried, jilted Jill, so to speak.
Well, no, we got engaged just before he crossed the Atlantic, and then he came back, and we were married and set out for Montreal.
I see. I want to thank you very much, and with your kind permission now, suppose we begin tonight's true story adventure. And this, ladies and gentlemen, by means of film recording, is Honeymoon Voyage.
Well, Jack, Peter and I were married on a cool November day just outside London. I bullied Peter into wearing a formal morning coat and a grey topper. The man in the kilt is Peter's brother and was our best man. My bridesmaid was a friend with whom I used to work. When we finally cut the wedding cake, I knew we were nearly off on our honeymoon.
And then we came back by ship to paint Salmo up and launch her at Montreal. We got her painted up and into the water first thing in the spring. It was only 2 days after the ice had cleared. We left Montreal very early one morning, sailed off down the St. Lawrence towards Quebec. The St. Lawrence runs northeast for hundreds of miles before it reaches the Atlantic. And going down, you go right in alongside these great big ships. That's the Empress of Britain. We felt absolutely like midgets alongside her.
Quebec was to be our last port of call before a long trip down to New York. We decided to get stores here. The tide was low, and so we had to lower the stores down from the jetty way above us on the rope. We carried a small light folding dinghy, which we demonstrated to a couple of friends in Quebec. For two, it's quite easy, but it's a bit of a game when three people try getting in, as you see when Martha tries sitting down. They look rather like three men in a saucer. We used to have a lot of fun at the islands because the natives used to gamble as to whether we'd make the shore or not.
After Quebec, we pushed off downriver. It gets much broader there, and a little blackbird decided he'd hitch a lift with us. He tried the dinghy for a while, but he didn't like it any more than Jill does, and eventually abandoned it, came onto our spinnaker pole instead.
I think cooking was the thing I dreaded most before we set out on this trip. This is one of the first meals I cooked. We have a 2-burner kerosene stove, and the stove and I used to argue a lot before I could get it lit properly. Spaghetti was a pretty simple meal, and poor Peter, I don't think he liked the look of it very much. Wondered whether he'd married the right woman.
Oh, I think I did.
However, he got it down.
Well, we had to keep going because the hurricane season sets in once we get down to the West Indies, and so we just kept on 4-hour watches, 4 hours in bed, 4 hours out in the cold. But all the time when you're out, I think both of us are absolutely longing for the moment when you can lean down and shout at the other person, "Come on, time for you to get up." Jill, you know, spent most of her time in her bunk when she wasn't on watch. She loved it, but she hated getting out. Used to go to bed with absolute layers of clothes on, put a lot more on top. Scarf and more trousers and a sweater. Had a great big quilted Cape-Arc windbreaker thing. That goes on. Then finally we had a terrible yellow oilskin. Looked rather like a nightgown. You were just like a ghost inside it, trying to get out again.
I think the worst part of going on watch was this very first moment when you put your nose out of the cabin door. The Arctic wind seemed to blow down and freeze your topknot off. I used to sit in the cockpit for 4 hours dreaming of my blankets on the hot water bottle that I could go down to as soon as my turn was over.
Yes, you love that hot water bottle.
Yeah.
I'd never seen one in a boat before. So it went on getting colder and colder and colder. And Jill managed to overcome the stove and make hot things on it. Getting coffee or soup at night, absolutely terrific in times like that. It looks very beautiful, but I don't know. We didn't really enjoy ourselves too much then. We kept on thinking of the warmth that was ahead of us. One morning, it got so cold that I didn't know what was happening, and I saw something ahead, looked rather like ice. So I gave Jill a shout to see what she thought it was. She came up.
It was ice. It was the most frightening thing we'd experienced at all, the whole trip, I think. If one of those floes had touched us, it might have split us in half and we'd have gone straight to the bottom. After about 3 days battling, we decided to make port until the coast should clear, coming into Pitcairn, Nova Scotia, for shelter. Coming alongside in a sailing boat is quite a game because you've got no engine to reverse, and of course you can't put the brakes on. Everything flaps and bangs and you think you're going to get knocked on the head with a boom, and you have to rush backwards and forwards trying to fend off.
The ice cleared after only 2 or 3 days, and we were able to push out to our great relief into the open sea and turn south where it got warmer and warmer and head for the States. Didn't take too long before we got there, and we broke the flag, the usual courtesy gesture of a ship when you get into the waters of a new country. New York was our first port of call. We went right down the East River, in among all the skyscrapers. It was June and miserably hot in New York now. We got becalmed right off the end of the United Nations building, and it was so hot that I went in bathing in East River. I wished I hadn't soon afterwards, because the water was a wee bit grubby. Another thing that frightens you is these great barges that rush up and down. We'd never heard about them, and they really frightened us. I think most people say hello to the Statue of Liberty. We say goodbye to it, as we pushed off south to Jamaica, about 3 weeks, 4 weeks ahead of us.
A month at sea very soon passes. I was surprised at this. And soon Jamaica was up ahead. We had to put up a quarantine flag to show that we'd come from foreign port. We hadn't got a yellow flag, so we put up a rather dirty yellow duster to do instead. In New York, I'd bought a new dress, and that evening we'd been invited out to dinner, so I tried this new outfit on. It was an awful game trying to keep it looking nice, changing in a small cabin and then scrambling over all this stuff in order to get into the dinghy. The dinghy gets a bit wet at times, so you have to fold yourself in so that your skirt doesn't touch at the bottom. Some little boys up in Canada had stolen our rowlocks, so we had to paddle Indian fashion to get ashore. It's quite a tiring business holding 2 oars together like that.
You hadn't quite learned how to balance it either. You never really liked the dinghy, I don't think, right at the end of the time we were with her.
No, I didn't. It's very wobbly. It's very awkward getting in and out of her. But I made it to the dock very well, in spite of Peter's rude comments from the Salmo. From the anchorage in Jamaica, we could watch all the children in the little compound opposite to us. They were marvelous dancers, as you see them doing the American jive, the Jamaican music.
Well, we pushed off from Jamaica heading for Panama, and a couple of bosun birds followed us. They call them bosun birds because of their long tails. Sailors used to think that they were like bosuns and always carried a marlinspike in their tails. You go right slap bang into the trades as soon as you leave Jamaica going down to Panama, and it gets pretty rough. You can see the way the deck's dancing about. Jill was very good now. She managed to cope with all the work on the upper deck that came her way when she was on watch. So she went up to take the Genoa in. It's a great big masthead sail that we use when the weather's calm. But it's a bit of a fight trying to get it in when it's blowing like this. She managed all right. And the idea was we were going to set the next smaller sail, which is our #1 staysail, that white one. That was really about the one job that Jill did find heavy. We've got winches to help, but even so, she's got an awful flog to get it really taut. We kept on going. When you're heeled over like that, the miles they peel off astern. And you feel, though it's a bit uncomfortable, at least it's good, and you're getting places. When I was on watch, it got blowing even harder. And so I didn't want to disturb Jill, so got the boat sailing herself by lashing the tiller. I'd practiced that a bit coming over the Atlantic by myself, and then was able to leave Salmo to sail herself while I went forward and lowered a great big bag of sail, pulled it right down, wound it in round the boom. We have roller reefing. I'd never be without it in a boat. It's so easy to shorten sail. And we made very good time down to Panama. We even split a mainsail then. Jill had to sew it up, very laborious job in the cabin. When we reached the Canal, we'd been at sea for 4 months since leaving Montreal. The Coast Guard were the first people who greeted us at Panama. They came out, then they were followed by the Canal Company boat, who gave us a big sheaf of papers to sign. You have quarantine forms and landing forms and tonnage declarations, just if you're a big liner. One of the things we found we were in trouble over was that we hadn't an engine, and without that they don't let you through. But very fortunately, the Seafarer, fine big American yacht, came, and they very kindly said they'd tow us through, so we lashed alongside and set off. I understand you've had the Hathaways on this show already and saw them towing us through. So here's the other side of the story. One of the things that you don't know till you try it in a yacht is that when you get into the locks, they open the sluices absolutely full, and you're thrown about all over just like a pea in a rattle. That's Charles Hathaway, the owner of the Seafarer. He's rather worried because the boat's grinding up the side of the lock. We got through all right.
The other side, we decided we'd have to paint, so we brought the boat in on a full tide, propped her up, and waited for the tide to go down. It was a very shadeless beach, so we fixed up a shade with the dinghy. Painting the boat is a very essential part before going into tropical waters. So Peter dug a trench right underneath the keel. If teredo worms find any part of the boat that has not got any paint on, they will come in and eat up the hull. A honeymoon like this isn't all just plain sailing. There's quite a lot of work attached to it as well. Once it was done, all we had to do was wait for the tide to come in, float us off, before setting out for the Galapagos Islands, a 2 weeks sailing trip away.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton. Part 2 of tonight's True Story Adventure continues in just a moment. But first, Instant Ralston presents Ralph and Waldo.
Say, Mother, don't say you don't have time to make hot cereal for the kids. Instant Ralston cooks in just 10 seconds.
Waldo.
Yeah? Excuse me. Yeah?
Listen, it takes 3 minutes alone for the water to boil.
Yeah, but I just told him it takes only 10 seconds.
Well, you better straighten it out.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a little announcement to make. We've been having a little meeting here.
Speak up.
We've been having a little meeting here, and maybe you better add 3 minutes. But it's worth it. I was never so embarrassed in all my life.
That's all right. They admired you for it.
You bet they admired you for it.
Who's that?
Lee Goodman.
Well, what does he know about it?
I know that Instant Ralston is worth 3 minutes and 10 seconds anytime. Plenty of hot and hearty whole wheat nutrition, whole wheat vitamins, whole wheat protein. And that means plenty of energy, man-sized energy.
Puppet-sized energy, too. No wonder they call Instant Ralston the power-packing cereal from Checkerboard Square.
It's tricky sailing between Panama and the Galapagos. It's only 1,000 miles, but we were lucky and got to Barrington Island, a little uninhabited island, in 2 weeks. There's a big white sandy beach there, so we rowed ashore to see what all the rocks were. Found they weren't rocks as soon as we got there, but sea lions. We weren't at all sure even if they were friendly sea lions. Jill didn't want to stay and find out, so she bailed out and left me to go in among them and see how they did behave. They're terribly friendly, really. They make an awful noise, but all they do is kiss each other. Jill finally was so impressed that she decided she'd be a sea lion and go right in among them. That's her with the pants on. Got right up trying to pet a couple of the babies. Just managed to touch them. One little chap, I think, was really full, thought she was his mother or something, came along, but got tired. Couldn't bother.
We had a lot of fun looking at all these different kinds of animals around here. This is a flightless cormorant who's just lost the use of his wings. He has no more enemies here and just doesn't bother to use them. The penguins we found a lot of fun. They're just small little birds. Darwin came here to evolve his origin of species, and we followed in his tracks. But we were just looking at the animals for fun. We weren't doing any research. We were on our honeymoon. And the marine iguanas are funny creatures. They look just like prehistoric dragons. Peter chased them up the rocks, and they spat down at him in self-defense. One evening, we decided we'd have fish for supper, and after half an hour, Peter had collected 5. While he was cleaning them, this pelican came along and tried eating up the bones. He found it a bit indigestible, I think. He was our last visitor before we set sail for Pitcairn, 3 weeks' journey away.
We tried reading up all about Pitcairn Island on the way down there. And that and writing our logs were the 2 main occupations. It's a terrific thrill when you suddenly see Pitcairn Island heaving up out of the ocean after 3 weeks with nothing at all to look at. Pitcairn is the island where the mutineers from the famous HMS Bounty took refuge in the 1790s. And all the romance of it comes right back to you when you see these descendants of the Bounty mutineers rowing out to greet you. We were the smallest boat that had ever been there, and they were all very thrilled by us. There's only one landing place there, all in among the surf and the rocks. They've covered it over with a trellis work of wood so they can haul the boats in and out. They can't leave them in the water, of course, or they'd just be bashed to pieces. They keep them up in these boathouses.
Making souvenirs to sell to passing shipping is their chief industry. Reynold is polishing, or rather sandpapering, a wooden tortoise, while his chimpanzee walks about the ground. That chimp was brought in as a pet from the outside. The women weave very gaily coloured baskets from dyed pandanus leaves.
It got awfully rough while we were there, and the anchorage is quite exposed, so we were rolling about very badly, and I was afraid we'd drag. So I got two of the islanders to paddle me out so that I could sail the boat off and on while Jill stayed ashore with one of the families. Very, very glad that I did, because it did get quite rough, and undoubtedly we would have dragged.
I waited at the top of the hill, waiting for them to come back, and they carried their sandpaper with them wherever they went. They're forever working, making souvenirs all day long. Soon it was time for me to return to Salmo, so I hitched a ride in their longboat. A steamer was due in today, and they were going to take out their vegetables and souvenirs. That's Fred Christian, a direct descendant of Fletcher Christian, leader of the Bounty Mutineers. Rowing out in the surf on a calm day is not very exciting. But as you see, when we're alongside Salmo, she's even bigger than we are, which surprises quite a lot. Once they'd left me on board Salmo, they set sail for the steamer, and we set sail for Tahiti.
And very soon we were up to our usual sea antics, diving in and swimming and towing behind the boats, gloriously refreshing. And the thing that Jill didn't like was sharks. She always shouting me, "Sharks, sharks, do be careful, don't stay in too long." And with that ringing in my ears, I wasn't quite as happy doing it as I might otherwise have been. We saw quite a number, but they never really bothered us too much. They never attacked. Before we got to Tahiti, I had to do a lot of navigating. I used to read the sextant, while Jill read the time. Usually she used to read it wrong. We had terrific rows, each saying, "That's your fault," when we didn't know where we were. But somehow or other we worked it out in the end and got right up to Tahiti. When you get there, you do have to be a bit more careful about your navigation, because the whole island's surrounded by a reef, and you get the surf beating down on it the whole time. There are only 2 or 3 narrow passes that you can go through. When you get rollers like that right alongside you and you're sailing in without an engine, it does make it quite nerve-wracking, and you're just praying that the wind won't drop while you're on the way in. At Papeete, which is where we went to first, you lie stern on to the jetty.
We'd lie stern on to the jetty and also stern on to the main street. Oh, there were rats there. They were awful creatures. They kept coming on board at night. Trying to do any housework, I'm ironing here, is a tremendous chore because there are so many things going on outside. Children, and sometimes 3 or 4 on one bicycle would go by, a whole family. And of course there are the girls, but they don't wear their straw skirts anymore, just the flowers in their hair.
We made a great discovery. We'd been married now for just over a year, and we discovered we were having a baby. So all our plans for going around the world had to be changed. And we decided the best place to go was up to Los Angeles, so that we could fly back to Scotland. Going through the doldrums is very slow business. You just lie, barely moving. And it took us 2 weeks to go the 1,000 miles from Tahiti up to the Marquesa Islands. We were actually becalmed for 2.5 days within sight of where we wanted to go, and that was very, very worrying. But eventually we did make it and went ashore to Taipi Valley.
It's a most typical South Sea island. It was described so well by your writer, Herman Melville. It's very beautiful and very green in Taipi. These were the last houses we saw before we set sail for Los Angeles, a long trip away.
The Marquesa Islands are about 3,000 miles from the United States. All the time there were just the porpoises to watch. I think every sailor loves porpoises. They come and play under the bow for hours on end, diving and swirling and spinning away. The sunsets were gorgeous. Los Angeles at last. We had been at sea a year. It was a wonderful thrill seeing a big harbor again. We dropped the Genoa for the last time and went into our berth. We'd written to the Hathaways and hoped they'd be there to meet us, and blow me down, they were too.
It was so lovely to be met by people we knew. Here we were in a foreign port, having finished our honeymoon, being greeted by people we'd met and who'd been so kind to us through the Panama. I'd like to do this honeymoon again. I think it was tremendous fun. We both enjoyed it such a lot.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hamilton, Mr. Hamilton. We've had quite a few transoceanic voyages on our program series, but to my recollection, this is the first time that we've had one featuring a small craft that had absolutely no auxiliary power whatsoever. Well, now, just a few moments ago, you gave away the secret, the reason why you were forced to curtail the second attempt to circumnavigate the globe. You're going to be parents. We're delighted to hear the news, and I assume, of course, that you're not going to be sailing back to Scotland or England.
No, we're not. We are flying back to Scotland.
I see. Well, now, what's going to happen to the Salmo here? Here we are in California at Terminal Island. Do you plan to sell the boat by chance?
Yes, it's rather sad, but that's the only thing we can do. We've just managed to sell her now.
I see. Now, Mr. Hamilton, didn't you consider it risky, if not downright dangerous, to attempt a voyage of this type without navigational help, such as radio, for example?
Oh, no, I think it's more fun that way. I got awfully fed up with all the equipment that you have in a modern ship, and I thought I'd like to do it the easy way. For a change, do it with just a chronometer. It's quite easy that way.
Well, now, it might be a lot of fun for you, but it certainly wouldn't be any fun for a landlubber like me. Well, Mr. Hamilton, now that you're out of the Navy and you're going to settle down to the life of a family man, just what do you plan to do, sir?
We're going to keep a dairy farm. My brother's got one already, and we're going to join up with him.
Uh-huh. Well, now, do you plan making another circumnavigation of the globe sometime in the future?
Well, Jack, I'd like to answer that. When the child's old enough, I hope we'll set sail again. Peter wants to go to the Bering Sea. I want to go to the Mediterranean, so I don't know which it'll be.
Well, I think, frankly, you'll go where the youngster tells you you're going to go. That's the way it is in most families. And by the way, we'd be very, very pleased to hear from you after the baby's born. Tell us if it's going to be a sailor or a beautiful young model, and we'd be so happy to hear it. I want to thank both of you for this very lovely, this charming, this most romantic true adventure film. We've enjoyed it. You've taken us to places we've never seen before in our program series. Pitcairn Island was just one of them. Again, my sincerest thanks to you both and the best of good luck to you. Goodbye, sir. Goodbye, Mrs. Hamilton. Thank you so very much. And now, preview scenes from next week's True Story Adventure. But first, this brief final reminder from Lee Goodman of Checkerboard Square.
Waiter, the checks, please. Rice checks. They're great at dinner time, too. Use them in place of toast under cheese rarebit or chicken a la king. Delicious. Because rice checks have a light, delicate toasted rice flavor. Rice checks, the light-sized, bite-sized cereal from Checkerboard Square.
If the Star of Africa burns brightly today, much of the credit must certainly go to the great philosopher-physician who dedicated his life to the Dark Continent, Dr. Albert Schweitzer. We're fortunate next week to present a first-person account of Dr. Byron Bernard's journey to Dr. Schweitzer in French Equatorial Africa. Dr. Bernard, a veterinarian, shepherded a small herd of milk goats from Cincinnati, Ohio, as gifts to the Great Samaritan. It's a modest yet moving story, Mission to Dr. Schweitzer. So that'll be next week's True Story Adventure, same time, same station. Until then, my thanks once again to Mr. and Mrs. Peter Hamilton of Glasgow, Scotland, and as always to you, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Thank you so much, and good night.
Bold Journey is brought to you every week on film by the Ralston Purina Company, Checkerboard Square, St. Louis, Missouri.